Hey everybody, welcome back, and today we're going to talk about Conditional Finality, the raid exotic from Root of Nightmares. As always, before we begin, if you like this video, a like and sub are always appreciated, and I'll have my Twitter and Twitch linked down below if you're interested in seeing more in the future. Also, towards the end of this video, there's going to be some updates about some channel stuff, so stick around if you want to hear some of that, but the TLDR is basically, I've been gone for a few weeks. It's just mostly because I'm busy. I do have a full-time job in addition to doing some YouTube stuff on the side. And like every video, there's some timestamps below if you just want to look at a certain section of this video. But instead of wasting any more of y'all's time, let's go ahead and start looking at Conditional Finality. Starting with obtaining Conditional Finality, it is only obtainable as a random drop from the final encounter of the Root of Nightmares raid, and it will drop directly into your inventory upon killing Nezarec if you get lucky enough to get it. You only get at most 3 chances per week, once per character. If you only play one character, you only get 1 chance per week, so if you have other characters leveled up, I would recommend at least trying to get the final boss cleared every time the reset rolls around. However, unlike previous raid exotics, you can increase your drop chances for this permanently by completing triumphs in the Root of Nightmares raid, similar to how you could do the same thing with dungeon exotics last year. I will say that the drop rate increases do appear to be pretty small, even from the flawless, which says that it greatly increases the drop chance, because myself and 2 clanmates did the flawless raid a couple weeks ago, and it still took us 3 more weeks to get it, even with all the other drop rate increases applied to our accounts, and that was with all 3 characters every week, which was really odd, even though it said greatly increases. So if you don't really want to get the flawless raid done, if that sounds like a bit too much, then don't worry about it. It didn't seem to do a ton. Moving on to the actual weapon itself, Conditional Finality is a double-barrel sawed-off shotgun, and it's currently the only sawed-off shotgun in the game, and has a unique feature as well of having split damage types between solar and stasis. Similar to how Two-Tailed Fox splits between Void and Solar, and now Arc with the Catalyst. The other perk that you'll have on this shotgun is that landing all your stasis pellets will freeze the target instantly, while landing almost all of your solar pellets will ignite the target. That makes it pretty good in theory against unstoppable champions, since both the freezing and the ignition will be able to stun them. The freezing and ignition do have some inconsistent interactions with both stasis and solar fragments. I was going to have a complete list in this video, but to keep the video from being way too long, I'd like to link to a Reddit thread on r/Destiny the game from user Merciful Zephyr that I think had some great testing of what does and does not work with Conditional Finality. I did replicate these tests myself just to confirm that the interactions are correct, and I can again confirm that those interactions in the post are correct. But like I said, to keep this video from being 20 minutes long, I won't go over all of them here. So if you're interested, I will link the original post in the description down below, so if you want to see the details, go there. I will also say that for this weapon, for most of your mods on your armor, treat it as a stasis weapon, similar to how you'd mod around Two-Tailed Fox, where it interacts best with Void mods despite switching elements when fired. And as for the damage dealt by Conditional Finality, it is a little odd, since you'll have some variance in the spread pattern and some interesting things in the damage profile of this shotgun. The first thing to know is that the stasis shot is a triangle and the solar one is a circle. As far as I know, that makes Conditional Finality the only shotgun in the game that changes its spread pattern. That can make hitting double shots of all crits a little odd depending on distance. Not that it matters a whole lot, since it's not necessarily the craziest boss DPS monster due to frequent reloads, as well as the fact that pellet shotguns don't necessarily need all crits. They don't have a huge crit ratio compared to something like a slug shotgun or a sniper, so you don't necessarily need to worry about hitting all 12 of your pellets as crits every time. And I did test the damage with it by getting single magazine values against Galron about 20 different times, then averaging all the values together, because the very short range, the ignition, the freeze, the shatter, the interesting things in the damage profile of this gun make it kind of difficult to test. So I did just a lot of tests and tried to keeping things as consistent as possible and then average them together. All in all, my total average was about 149,672 damage per magazine, so that's 2 shots, and then a reload time of 0.59 seconds. It takes 0.72 seconds to fire both your shots, so that's 1.31 seconds total between shooting and reloading, and the DPS including the reload time then came out to being about 114,253 based on those numbers, which is actually kind of crazy, at least on paper, especially when you consider that this value is calculated with Well of Radiance, but without Divinity, which I usually do test with. However, in this case I didn't, because the div interfered with the shatter damage and where the game tracked that. So if you want to know the numbers of Well with Divinity, which is another 15%, you can add 15% to the value without Divinity and you'll get a value of 131,339 damage per second. Which is not bad, but before you go 6 stacking that in raids, those values don't really paint the full picture. Mostly because when you DPS test with any weapon that utilizes subclass effects, in this case both freezing and igniting, you do need to take a deeper look at the damage profile of whatever weapon it is you're using. And in this case, you've got a pretty big chunk of your damage output that's coming from your shatter and ignite effects. But since those are debuffs applied to an enemy, different players cannot apply different instances of those debuffs. Basically, one player freezes the target, and then another player cannot apply another instance of freeze to the same target until the initial instance of the freezing effect has been removed, either by shattering or falling off over time. The same goes for ignition, so if two players apply ignite at the same time, only one will actually go through, which I think, as a result, makes Conditional Finality best used for damage strats maybe as a solo player, or in a fireteam environment you can treat it kind of like Wither Horde, where only one player will be able to use it at its full effectiveness against a boss at a time, so you need to split up your loadouts accordingly. The other thing to think about with Conditional Finality, though, when you're doing damage testing with it, is that it has incredibly low range. So low, in fact, that it has a unique barrel perk called Shorten Barrel, which gives it really low range. It's only about 35, and as a result, you're going to start hitting damage fall off at about 4.8 meters with it. And even though you won't need to be able to melee them like with a trench barrel shotgun, you will still need to be incredibly close before your pellets start to hit the damage fall off. However, again, kind of a double-edged sword with the subclass effects, one benefit of this weapon having those subclass effects in its damage profile is that the shatter and ignition damage are both completely unaffected by range, since they aren't technically part of the weapon's damage, so that the shotgun's stats are not being included when the game calculates damage for the stasis shatter and the solar ignite. Now that you know a little more about its damage, let's look at the other main use that people have been talking about for Conditional Finality, and that's as a champion killer. Mainly because both the freezing and the igniting effects are able to stun unstoppable champions, and the freeze effect is actually able to completely shut down all champions, although it will not necessarily stun them, so keep that in mind. You can freeze, barrier, and overload champs, but they won't stun on breaking unless you hit them with a weapon with the corresponding mod. And in my opinion, I do think Conditional Finality is decent for champions, but I also think that better options exist, including some that will not take your exotic slot, and options that won't take your exotic slot that are also in the kinetic slot, so they are directly competing with Conditional Finality. However, I will talk about those use cases towards the end of this section. I just want to highlight Conditional Finality first, because in theory, you can have it stun against two types of champions: Unstoppables using the built-in stasis and solar effects, and then if you're able to make yourself Radiant, like with a solar subclass or something, you could then stun against barrier champions as well. However, it's also able to put in some work against champs just normally, because the freezing effect can buy you enough time to get the damage and reload out just to reapply the freeze again. Unlike Chill Clip, you don't need to hit twice, you don't need to slow and then freeze, it will just freeze instantly as long as you hit all the pellets. However, the risk here is that you're going to have to stand incredibly close to whatever champion you're fighting to accomplish this, since A, the range is really short, and B, only one missed pellet will result in the target not freezing, and then you'll almost certainly die to the champion unless you have a plan B of some kind, and at that point, why not just use whatever your plan B is if it's so reliable. Also, if you're too slow to shoot again once you reload your shotgun, you may not freeze the champion fast enough to prevent it from just killing you, so keep that in mind when you're building a loadout for higher-end content around this weapon. And those high risks bring me to something else here, mainly that I'd prefer to probably just use something like a Riptide with Chill Clip. Since I get more range with that, since it's a fusion rifle, I'm able to stun 3 types of champions with this weapon, 2 of which I can stun intrinsically, because Stasis Slow from the first Chill Clip shot can stun overloads, and then the freeze from a second Chill Clip shot can be used against Unstoppables. Then, like with Conditional Finality, if I'm able to apply Radiant on myself, the entire weapon works against barrier champions. However, there's another case that we need to think about here, because Lightfall's changes to endgame modifiers have caused some potential areas where weapons that normally might not be able to hold their own in just the sandbox as a whole may actually be quite good, and those modifiers are going to be weapon overcharges, which give every weapon of the type matching the overcharge a 25% buff, and I actually think that's quite good. For reference, I used Conditional Finality this week in the Master Raid, since this week it was overcharged shotguns, and it actually did quite a bit more damage than I was anticipating, much more than my usual go-to, which is my Chill Clip Riptide. Unfortunately, the weapon's damage as a whole is not necessarily increased, because the shatter and ignite damage does not get affected by that overcharge modifier. Like how I mentioned earlier, it's not part of the shotgun's damage itself, but those would be affected by elemental surges. However, thing to keep in mind about the elemental surge effects is that they do not stack stack with the overcharges. The surges on your boots do, but the surges on the actual mission will not. So if you had a stasis surge, for example, it should affect the stasis shot of the shotgun. I'll test for the solar one once we have a stasis surge again. But if we in theory had a stasis surge and shotgun overcharge, then they would not stack to give 50%, it would just be 25% from one. However, I think the best thing I can say about Conditional Finality is its overall feel. It is one of the most snappy and responsive weapons I've played with in a first-person shooter in a very long time. It draws very quick, has a pretty good reload speed, and can be fired pretty quickly after a draw, which is always nice for a shotgun in an FPS game. I do kind of wish the time between firing both barrels was shorter, but it's not really a huge issue. It's just that compared to other sawed-off shotguns in FPS games I've played, it feels a tiny bit sluggish, but it hits really hard to make up for it, and I think it's fine, as well as the snappy reload and the good handling, I think make for a really solid shotgun. Again, all in all, I don't think it's terrible in any respect, but I do just feel like when it comes to some of the more difficult end-game content in Destiny right now, shotguns already aren't really a weapon of choice, and this one, while much better than most others, doesn't feel like it's crazy enough to make me want to use it over some safer options. Now, in some solar stasis builds built around its two effects, then maybe it could be a bit better, but I don't really feel like there's currently one that sticks out to me, and I do know that it's apparently much better in PvP, but I'm not as interested in the PvP side of Destiny 2, at least in the videos I put out. I do like playing it, but I'm not huge on necessarily testing and looking at it unless it's really crazy. But if you're a big PvP player, this could be something you might like. And once again, a huge thank you to all of you who made it to the end. I do want to take a quick second to do some updates, just mostly talking about like where I randomly disappear to at times, and then some content updates for the channel. The first thing, I know I randomly disappear. At the time of me working on this, I think my last upload was like a month ago, and I apologize for that. The main thing is that I do have a full-time job in addition to doing some YouTube stuff on the side, so I try to, make time for it when I can, but sometimes I'm too busy, and that was kind of just the case here. I do try to keep up with streaming a little more, so if you're, interested, Twitch down below as always. But yeah, that's just what happens when I randomly vanish. Don't worry about it. Then the second thing, content going forward. So I do still like Destiny. I play it a lot. My only thing is the type of content I do, a lot of the testing kind of methods. There's only so much one season that I can necessarily test, script out, record, edit, because I do all my YouTube stuff myself. I record, I write, I edit, I do all that myself currently. And the idea is that I usually test stuff that's interesting to me. Sometimes there's not really anything that's of interest. It's just kind of very clear-cut metas. Sometimes it's not, just kind of depends. So what I want to do is diversify a little bit. The main thing is I want to try making a couple videos, mostly one-offs on games that aren't Destiny. For now, the Destiny content is going to stay the same as it is, but hopefully this means that I don't go like long periods of time without uploading anything at all. Because even though it may not be a Destiny upload, it could at least be an upload about something. So in this case, I'm going to start with a couple single player games. So over the next month as they release, I'm going to try and get videos written, recorded, and edited of Mage Seeker, the new League of Legends story game, Jedi Survivor, the new Star Wars game, and then hopefully Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, because those are three games that I'm very excited for. I'll probably be streaming them and then trying to get videos out about them. I'm going to experiment with the format just a little bit, just to hopefully get it nailed down, and that's probably going to be something I might do going forward, just whenever the Destiny content is a little light. So again, if you're interested in that, there will be some of those hopefully coming soon, and yeah, thank you again. Won't waste any more of y'all's time. Later, everybody.